Number 10. X-Men 1602. You know I gotta talk about this Neil Gaiman and Marvel collaboration yet again. One of the central conflicts within Marvel's 1602 story is the subject of witchbreed, in other words, mutants. This story takes the adversity that the regular X-Men face in modern times and amplifies it to about 10, having the mutants be the main victims of this timeline's Spanish Inquisition. Mutants are hunted down and treated in the most horrible medieval ways. Standing against this horrible treatment were a version of the X-Men led by Carlos Xavier, or this Earth's King Charles I, who refers to them as Mutantur, or Changing Ones. The team was made up of Warner, aka the Angel, Henry Hal McCoy, Brother Petros and Sister Wanda, Scotius Summer Isle, Roberto Trefusis, and the wee apprentice John Grey. Now, this may be a basic team of X-Men, but all of these characters are very powerful in their own right, and in an Elizabethan world that can barely even comprehend them, with limited technology to even oppose them, they're even more powerful in retrospective.
Number 9. Giant Size Little, or Earth 71912. Formerly known editorially as the X-Babies, the X-Men of Earth 71912 are an alternate multiversal version of the X-Men as created by Skottie Young and Guri Hiru. Young's take on the Marvel Universe generally sees famous teams reinvented as little kids, like in his original take on Avengers vs. X-Men, where baby teams of Avengers and X-Men fight one another over a teddy bear named Bucky Bear. While they were once babies, this X-Men team has seemingly grown up a little bit at least, appearing as young children now. We also see this version of the X-Men and various mutant heroes and villains appearing in the Infinity comic written by Skottie Young, Giant Size Little Marvels, with art by Dax Gordine. While this team is technically just kids, that doesn't mean they aren't capable of making powerful moves. It just means that their world is governed by more kid-like and kid-friendly rules and confines. However, I have no doubt that the Giant Size Little X-Men could still kick butt in other universes as well, should they need to. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, please head on over to Facebook, where you can also show us some love by clicking that like and clicking that follow and all of the Facebook stuff.
Number 8. X-Men 2099. As the fourth incarnation of the X-Men in this universe, with basically no connection to classic characters or plot threads other than being inspired by the ideas of Charles Xavier, the nature of the 2099 X-Men team created by John Francis Moore and Ron Lim, first appearing in X-Men 2099 #1 in August of 1993, makes them one of the most creative and interesting versions of the team ever. The team comes together at the end of the 21st century, led by Desert Ghost, who has the ability to break down molecular structure with his left hand and heal even lost limbs with his right hand. He had a vision for a new future for mutant kind, and his team is made up of completely new characters like Cerebro, who has the abilities of Cerebro basically, and the ability to manipulate a person's nervous system, or Skullfire, who had ambient energy particle absorption. All the members of this X-Men team have unique powers to take on the grim corporate rule future of this timeline.
Number 7. Apocalypse's Horsemen. Apocalypse's Horsemen have featured many X-Men and many X-Men adjacent characters over the years. One of the more recent iterations of the team after Apocalypse was awakened following House of M and Decimation included Polaris as Pestilence, Gazer as War, Sunfire as Famine, and finally Gambit as Death. That's a good number of X-Men that he recruited that time around. Although Apocalypse and his Horsemen are generally opposed by the X-Men themselves, the fact remains that there have also been a good number of them recruited by Apocalypse himself. And in the Age of Apocalypse reality, more mutants have joined him than not. Even though he is still technically opposed by Magneto's X-Men there, many of the mutants we'd associate with the X-Men team in the main continuity end up actually joining Apocalypse instead in that reality. In fact, at one point, Wolverine even becomes the new Apocalypse in the Age of Apocalypse reality. Pretty wild, I know.
Number 6. Asgardian X-Men. In What If number 12 from 1990, we get a little taste of what would happen if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard after their adventure during the Asgardian Wars in X-Men Annual number 9. Cyclops puts the X-Men to a vote, with the winning majority deciding whether to stay in or leave Asgard. Now Loki sent the losing majority home to Earth while allowing the winning majority to stay in Asgard. The result is an Asgardian X-Men squad that disperses among the Asgardian society, and it is so cool. Nightcrawler becomes a member of the New Warriors 3, or I guess 4. Sunspot becomes an Asgardian warrior, Dani Moonstar becomes a member of the Valkyrie, Ilyana Rasputin becomes the Enchantress, and above all of that and more, Storm becomes the goddess of thunder, with a version of Mjolnir becoming one of the most powerful versions of Thor in the comics ever. The X-Men becoming gods of Asgard with all the support of the already existing gods? Helheim, yes. Sorry, that's a bad joke, sorry.
Number 5. Alison Hargreaves. Alison Hargreaves is maybe one of the most original feeling ripoffs that I've listed here in terms of, individual characters we're talking about, but still, she does seem to take a lot of inspiration from one very prominent X-Men character, Jean Grey. As a child, I would say Alison especially resembles Jean in the comics, with her hair appearing red as opposed to her standard purple that we're used to seeing her have when she's an adult. And with purple hair, you could use that to link her to another famous telepathic or psionic character, Psylocke, aka Betsy Braddock, and also aka Quanon, depending on what we're talking about, and even if they're combined, that's a whole thing. Sometimes separate, sometimes tragically combined, I would say. Alison Hargreaves is known by the codename of Rumor. This is because she can use her powers to influence the will of others by using the phrase, "I heard a rumor." While Jean and Psylocke don't typically use their powers in this way, Jean is definitely capable of controlling people and influencing them in their minds using her own abilities, and I would also say so is Psylocke to it, perhaps a lesser extent, but still is a thing that she could do. Although her psionic abilities tend to be more used in direct combat, where she can deal mental damage using psi weapons, because that's what Psylocke likes to do.
Number 4. Excalibur. Excalibur first appeared in Excalibur Special Edition number 1 by the legendary Chris Claremont and Alan Davis in December of 1987. They are a government-sponsored team of extraordinary mutants who fight for the people of jolly old England and their interests around the globe. The team is usually formed by British heroes and former members of the X-Men and was originally assembled with hopes to carry on Charles Xavier's dream and legacy, but their adventures usually deal with magical and interdimensional crises linked to the pocket dimension of Otherworld. The team right now is made up of Captain Britain, Betsy Braddock, and formerly Captain Britain, Brian Braddock, Nightcrawler, Shadowcat, Phoenix, Magan, Captain Avalon, Gambit, Gloriana, Jubilee, Richter, and Shatterstar. But the team has included awesome heroes like Black Knight, Colossus, Dazzler, Juggernaut, Lockheed, Moira McTaggart, Rogue, and Sage, and was reformed under Apocalypse as a mutant diplomatic organization in Krakoa, the UK, and in Otherworld. One of the best X-Men adjacent team variations ever, in my humble opinion.
Number 3. Curse of the Mutants. Curse of the Mutants represents a time and team that were turned evil by really the curse of vampirism. Well, at least a few of the X-Men were. Primarily, Jubilee was the one captured and transformed into a vampire as a means to lure out Wolverine. This was all part of Zarus', Dracula's son, evil plan to take over San Francisco and bring all vampires together under his control, of course. However, what Zarus was not anticipating was that Wolverine, who he successfully managed to lure out and transform, it seemed, had actually been caught and turned as part of Cyclops' master plan. Haha, he one-upped him with a plan that was part of his plan. In the end, the X-Men therefore managed to defeat Zarus, with Wolverine being reverted back to being human, or rather I suppose I should say mutant, and Jubilee being rescued, although for a time Jubilee would still remain a vampire.
Number 2. Multiversal X-Men. Gonna be honest here, this one's a little wacky. As an example, at one point the Kurt Wagoner on the team used a collection of hundreds of disembodied Professor Xavier heads to search the multiverse for a habitable planet for the population of Earth 12245. And then he teleported them all to that new world. That alone puts the team high on the list, but the other members just bring the team comfortably to the number 2 spot. A Wolverine that was Governor General of Dominion of Canada, who was in a romantic heroic duo with the demigod Hercules, who gave Wolverine adamantine bones, and who was also on the team. Emmeline Frost Summers, who was granted the immortality of a goddess. Catherine Pride, who goes by Shadow and is as equally powered as her 616 self, a genius disembodied head of Xavier, that's by itself, Corporal Scott Summers, who fought in and ended the American Civil War in 2 weeks, having dispatched about 6,000 Confederate soldiers, and regular old Dazzler. They came together thanks to the villain Savior, but fought against 10 evil Xaviers, including a Witch King and Cthulhu Xavier, that were trying to destroy reality.
Number 1. The Five. The Five have to be one of the most powerful mutant teams to have ever existed at this point in the main continuity, or if not, they would still have to be pretty high up up there, I think. The Five are an offshoot mutant team whose job it is to make sure that all mutants are brought back to life. They were brought together to bring back all mutants who had ever passed on previous to the present time and age of the X-Men. Their ranks include multiple Omega level mutants, and they have literally mastered control over one of the most powerful governing principles of the cosmos, that of life and death. I know, it's pretty crazy. Their ranks include Hope Summers, Elixir, Proteus, Egg, and Tempest. Number 10. Cyberforce. Cyberforce has to be one of the biggest ripoffs of the X-Men that I've ever seen. They also are likely inspired by X-Force though, based on their team dynamic and their team name, so a little bit of like an X-Men X-Force. I would say both of those things kind of come together here. Cyberforce was a group of mutants who also ended up captured by cyber data. Almost all, if not literally all of the team members, bear extremely strong resemblances to the X-Men mutants, which contributed to the series getting some serious flack in terms of it being kind of a copycat of Marvel's X-Men. However, it did differ in regards to some key elements. While X-Men was more targeted towards being family friendly, as many of Marvel's comics generally have been throughout the years, well except for maybe lines like Max and to an extent I would say Ultimate, Cyberforce did not shy away from pushing the boundaries of, let's say, teen related content, and this also got them some flack among certain circles when it came to critiques of the series and the team as well. Cyberforce is a team and series that originated at Image Comics in partnership with Malibu Comics. The team was created by Mark Silvestri and would eventually move over to Top Cow Productions, which is actually his own publisher, so yeah, Cyberforce. And friends, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd and you love when we talk about things that are mutant adjacent, mutant related, or just mutants in general, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. Ripclaw. I wonder who that could be a ripoff of. If you guessed another very famous Marvel superhero mutant with claws that is known by the code name of Wolverine, you'd be right, bub. Ripclaw was one of the few members of the team to actually withstand the test of time, being one of the most famous and long-lasting even after Cyberforce began to fade. Despite his team losing prominence, Ripclaw would end up continuing to guest star, showing up in other series like Silvestri's The Darkness. He's also had his own short solo series as well for a bit. Ripclaw differs from Wolverine slightly in the fact that he has ties to the native peoples of America, with it being believed he may belong originally to the Apache tribe, although he also seems to have ties to the Navajo, the Lakota Sioux, and the Cheyenne as well. Like Wolverine, he also has experience and a background in the martial arts as well. Ripclaw possesses cybernetic claw enhancements that are similar to Marvel's Deathstrike. They're actually claws that are part of his fingernails, allowing his fingernails to extend and become razor sharp. In addition to that, he also has superhuman senses, strength, and a healing factor. Number 8. Wildcats. Wildcats is a team created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi for Image Comics, during a period when many creators were actually working with Image because they sought to own their own properties and ideas, which the big two were pretty opposed to at that time, and I mean, honestly still are today. Wildcats actually became so popular that despite the fact that DC did not want to let creators like Jim Lee own their creations and believed that it was actually the brand and staple characters that sold comics, not the creators behind said characters and narratives, they would later approach Lee to offer a sum for ownership of the Wildcats and his Wildstorm universe, so that DC could take over the publishing of both. Wow. When it comes to this team, it's easy to see the influence of Marvel's X-Men, just even when we look at its creator, Jim Lee's history. Lee is also known for his amazing art, and despite being now heavily integrated with DC Comics, is also no stranger to Marvel, having been one of the people behind one of the most famous and iconic runs, the 90s X-Men run, which featured art by Jim Lee throughout. In Wildcats, we follow a team of superpowered beings, known as half-breeds, who are the result of aliens coming to Earth, known as the Cherubim, and mating with humans. The conflict of the comic pits the Cherubim and their offspring against the Daemonites, another alien race they have been warring with for centuries. Number 7. Marauders. Marauders has to be one of my favorite X teams we've had in a long time. They weren't always so amazing and heroic though. The Marauders was initially a name taken by Mr. Sinister's band of mutants, who were pretty evil. The same mutants behind the Mutant Massacre, where many Morlocks were killed, and Angel, one of the original X-Men, got properly messed up. Poor Angel. Recently though, the Marauders' name was reclaimed by Kitty Pryde, now known as Captain Kate Pryde, the Hellfire Trading Company's Red Queen. Kate leads her Marauders team in an effort to fight mutant injustices the world over. Where there are mutants who are being kept from Krakoa or oppressed, her and the Marauders fight to free them. They also operate in trades, making deliveries the world over to ensure Krakoan-based goods and products like medicine and whiskey are delivered to Krakoa's trade partners. Number 6. Umbrella Academy. The Umbrella Academy was definitely influenced and inspired by other similar teams that came before, like the X-Men. There's no doubt there. But there are also elements of Hellboy in there as well, which is pretty cool, especially with how oddball the comic series, its characters, and the show inspired by the comics can be. Umbrella Academy and its creation, however, was also influenced by Gerard Way's experience with the band My Chemical Romance and his time on tour. For those of you that don't know, Gerard Way is the person that created the Umbrella Academy, so fun facts. In fact, many of the Hargreaves are actually inspired by his bandmates themselves, who of course quickly become like your family when you spend so much time together with them and, you know, especially when you're on tour. The Umbrella Academy is the story of a group of superpowered individuals who were adopted by Sir Reginald Hargreaves after their mysterious births, which all happened on the same day all over the world. Reginald recruited them to create his own superhero team, raising them and training them to hone their skills and master them over time. However, his plan was only met with, I would say, a modicum of success, and eventually the Umbrella Academy would disband. However, years later they would come together again after the possibly mysterious death of their adoptive father and would be forced to reunite in order to prevent the end of the world. Number 5. Inhumans vs. X-Men. In Inhumans vs. X-Men, the X-Men team kind of become the bad guys. This was all thanks to the machinations of Emma Frost, who manipulated the rest of the mutants by making Cyclops appear as her own martyr. She made it appear as though Cyclops was killed by the Inhumans so that she could inspire the mutants to rise up against the Inhumans and basically go to war against them. In reality, the Inhumans did not actually want to fight the mutants and instead preferred to find a peaceful resolution initially. That was what they kind of wanted to do. They were like, we're sorry that we kind of accidentally killed some of your people, let's figure it out. But no. The conflict started when exposure to the Terrigen Mists ended up being deadly to the mutants, some of whom got very sick and then died, causing a case of Mpox. However, in the end it was revealed that Emma was simply using her illusion powers to make people believe Cyclops was still alive after he'd already died almost instantly due to exposure to the Terrigen Mists. She then made people believe that Black Bolt had actually been the one to kill Cyclops, which was what got all the other mutants and X-Men riled up. Needless to say, after the truth came out and everything was mostly resolved, Emma went deep into hiding as a result of everyone being pretty pissed at her, which honestly, fair enough. Number 4. Next Men. The Next Men definitely were inspired by the X-Men. There's no doubt about that in my mind at all. They were a creation of John Byrne for Dark Horse Comics, and of course John Byrne is also a writer who has a history of, you know, being tied to the X-Men as well. These superpowered beings were more anti-heroes than straight up heroes who attempt to rescue a world that they really don't know a lot about, having been raised in a virtual reality world inside a lab. In other words, they kind of, to me, share some similarities to our friend Phantom X. The Next Men also have some other interesting elements when it comes to how they were presented in contrast to the X-Men. Byrne tried to ground them and their abilities a little bit more in reality by making pretty much every superpower that they have come with some kind of quirk or some kind of setback in some way, trying to acknowledge some of the real world consequences one might actually have to deal with physically or mentally as a result of having superpowers. Because, you know, usually when you have superpowers it's like you have super strength and like it's not a problem for your body, but then there are other characters that have super strength in other worlds where it's like, okay, they're super strong but they're not super durable, which seems like how powers would probably go, and then you just mess yourself up by using your super strength. Number 3. X-Force. In principle, X-Force should be one of the most powerful teams out there because they usually aim to kill. But there are some other teams on here that are known for having simply more Omega level mutants on their most powerful rosters, which is why I hesitated to put X-Force too close to the top, although they're pretty up there still. X-Force initially, though, started as Cable's team, who himself is known for being on the verge of Omega level, possibly the techno-organic virus being one of the main things holding him back from that status. The X-Force was originally Cable's Black Ops team, used for taking out those he deemed threats to the timeline, but would later become more known as Wolverine's team, and at one point was also Sabretooth's team. Currently in the comics, X-Force is actually more thought of as Beast, aka Hank McCoy's team, although Wolverine is still a major player on it. There was a recent incarnation of the team that included Omega-level telepath Jean Grey on its roster as well. Number 2. G-Men. Before we even get X-Men in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we're probably likely going to get X-Men copycats in the streaming series universe based off of Garth Ennis's The Boys. The G-Men are a villainous team inspired by the X-Men, who are another group of kind of Vought-endorsed heroes. At least I think they're Vought-endorsed. I haven't read all of The Boys, so I apologize if I'm incorrect about that one. And unsurprisingly, it's also believed that they'll be linked to Payback when they arrive in the live-action series of its own universe. Payback, for those who may not be aware, are basically The Boys' version of Marvel's Avengers in the comics, with their leader being a parody-inspired version of Captain America there, known as Soldier Boy, although they kind of went a different way with it a little bit in the live-action series. G-Men are led by John Godolkin, whose team were all kidnapped when they were younger and raised and trained by him in his own school. The name G-Men likely comes from his last name, Godolkin, but can also be a slang term used with negative connotation to indicate those working for the government. G-Men, government men. You know? So that name kind of has a double meaning, and also it just basically means, yeah, they're not very good people. Surprise, surprise. Number 1. John Godolkin. If you thought Professor X was bad, wait till you meet his boys equivalent, which of course is way worse. The founder of the G-Men and its other spin-off teams is John Godolkin. In The Boys, Godolkin has done a lot of awful things to his superpowered students. Many of them I cannot even mention on YouTube because they're just that bad and kind of goes against TOS. Unlike Charles Xavier though, Godolkin has no powers to speak of, being more similar to Niles Calder, I would say, from DC in that regard, who is in essence the head of their version of an off-kilter outcast hero team known as the Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol, in fact, is not a ripoff of the X-Men, if you're wondering why I didn't list them here, as their existence actually predates the X-Men by a few months in terms of the comic's release. Godolkin ended up capturing his team members as opposed to offering them a place at his school, taking them kinda against their will. He specifically, however, seeks out runaways and orphans, which, to be honest, so kind of does Charles. So, although some of Xavier's students do admittedly come from happy, healthy families that simply basically chose to admit their children to his school to be trained in the use of their powers. So I would say, you know, that could be a difference. Number 10. Dark X-Men. The Dark X-Men are basically what we get when Norman Osborn is put in charge of all the super teams that you can imagine. This all went down during the Dark Reign period over at Marvel Comics. Norman ended up becoming the world's greatest hero, at least in civilians and the government's eyes, after he successfully shot and killed Skrull Queen Varanki, in essence ending secret wars and, in a weird twist, kind of saving the day. Not something people usually expect with Norman Osborn. As a reward, he was given the task of creating a new organization to take over for the disbanded S.H.I.E.L.D. Norman created Hammer in response and made his own teams of both Dark Avengers and Dark X-Men. His initial roster included Dark Beast, Mystique, Mimic, and Omega. I feel like Dark Beast is such a great evil mutant that he generally just gets to be on like almost every evil mutant X-Men team. But also, I love Dark Beast, so I'm kind of fine with that. I wish he was still alive though, so that at least I had some way to rationally explain Hank's behavior lately, who I thought might have been Dark Beast this whole time, but considering that Dark Beast is dead and everything else that's been going on, this now seems extremely unlikely, sadly. Dark Beast, please come back to save Hank from himself. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not click that subscribe button? I know there's a bunch of you that aren't subscribed, so I'm talking to you. Click the subscribe, do it. Do it, I say! Number 9. Avengers vs. X-Men. Some might argue as to who is really evil in this storyline, if anyone is, but then there are those that actually might see it the Avengers way. After all, in Avengers vs. X-Men, there are really two sides to take, although thankfully in the end, the two teams do manage to put their differences aside to come together and resolve the issue of what to do exactly with the Phoenix Force. However, in this story, the X-Men initially are opposed to the Avengers as they want to welcome the Phoenix Force back to Earth, which is reportedly rapidly on the approach. It's believed that the Phoenix is kind of coming to merge with Hope Summers. While the X-Men are kind of wary of that, they do feel more open to the idea of the Phoenix's return, feeling that they could maybe use it for good, whereas the Avengers are pretty much vehemently opposed as a result of the Phoenix's history of destruction. The Avengers, and perhaps rightfully so, would rather see the cosmic entity completely destroyed. As the fight ensues, the Phoenix is split into 5 pieces, and some of the X-Men are even corrupted later by its power, becoming known as the Phoenix 5. Number 8. Cerebro's X-Men. Cerebro ended up at one point gaining sentience, and and creating their own X-Men. The sentient Cerebro took the form of Professor Charles Xavier. Cerebro recruited their own X-Men to oppose the true X-Men team, or at least seemingly did. We'd later learn that this team, composed of Grey King, Rapture, Landslide, Crux, Mercury, and Zaos, were actually also imposters. In truth, being nothing more than nanotech lifeforms which Cerebro had built using personality templates that Cerebro had taken from within its own mutant database. Cerebro had wanted to oppose the real Xavier and the real X-Men, getting them out of the way so that it could successfully launch a satellite that would help it to locate and then catalog all mutants on the planet, freezing them in a cryogenic stasis in order to preserve their DNA. Yeah, cataloging mutants doesn't sound so bad until you realize that's what Cerebro wanted to do with them. After Cerebro's X-Men were defeated, Cerebro labeled them as failures before absorbing their digital bodies back within itself, becoming a giant monstrosity. Fortunately, Cerebro was defeated by the real deal in the end, Charles Xavier, and the real X-Men team. Number 7. Grifter. Cole Cash has some distinct differences, but also a lot of distinct similarities, I would say, at the same time, to another very famous and prominent X-Man that you are likely familiar with. Gambit. Grifter is Cole Cash, a literal grifter in terms of his backstory and origin from a young age. Not only does he have a history as a con man, but while having a shady past, he also appears to genuinely want to save and help people he deems innocent. Sort of like a thief with a heart of gold. Sound like, anyone you already know? Grifter has had psionic powers in the past, but is also known for his skills as a marksman, generally wielding 2 guns or using throwing weapons in combat. So yeah, he might not have the exact power set of Gambit, he doesn't like throw cards and they explode, but the whole, throwing things element of his abilities definitely seems to fit the bill otherwise. And I mean, I feel like even his look is very Gambit-esque. Number 6. 10 Evil Xaviors. A few teams on this list aren't specifically made up of a copy 1-for-1 of Evil X-Men, and this is one of those teams. It was simply too good for me to not include, so you're welcome. In the Fantastic Extreme X-Men, this is a team of villains from alternate realities and even perhaps the main reality that our multiversal X-Men team led by Earth 616's Dazzler must face. The 10 Evil Xaviors feature one that is a cowboy, another that is a Cthulhu-like floating brain, one that is a giant Akanti whale, and so many more amazing weird alternates of the X-Men's leader and mentor. Number 5. Age of Apocalypse. In the alternate reality of Earth 295, known as the Age of Apocalypse, the X-Men were one of the final superhero teams standing against the villainous tyrant known as Apocalypse. Of course, because it's his age. In this reality, many other superhero teams were wiped out and Magneto became the leader of the X-Men in Charles Xavier's stead after Professor X was killed when Legion traveled back in time and attempted to end Magneto. Charles put himself in the way of the kill shot, thereby dying and erasing Legion from existence, while also creating the Age of Apocalypse reality where Apocalypse attacked Earth years earlier than in the main timeline. While Magneto's X-Men roster from this reality would change over time, the original roster consisted of Iceman, Storm, Colossus, Jean Grey, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch, of course. Really the only X-Men team the once mutant children of Magneto have ever been on. Later on, the team would be joined by AOA Wolverine, known as Weapon X, and Rogue, who would later also become Magneto's lover and eventually wife in this reality. Number 4. Revenants. Who are the Revenants? They're basically like, well, evil X-Men. Well, at least evil versions of a few of the X-Men. In an alternate reality where Cassandra Nova becomes ruler of the world, they may even have a ton more power over there. In fact, I believe they do. I think they rule that alternate world. Ugh. But the ones we're talking about here instead appear in Uncanny X-Force, where they face off against some of the former / current / future X-Men members. Revenants are also known by another name though, one you might be familiar with if you are a Cassandra Nova fan or a Shi'ar fan: Mumadrai. The Mumadrai are basically evil duplicates of oneself. According to Shi'ar beliefs, in order to be born, one must first defeat their evil alternate, their Mumadrai, in the womb. That was what Charles did in order to defeat Cassandra Nova, his seemingly evil twin, who really is a Mumadrai. However, despite being defeated because Charles was so powerful, in reflection, so was Cassandra Cassandra, who would end up recovering and returning years after that initial defeat. In Uncanny X-Force issue number 10, we're introduced to a few more Mummudrai that are the dark reflection of Betsy Braddock's Psylocke, Storm, and Puck. While Puck has never been an X-Men and isn't a mutant, he is X-Men adjacent, having served on Alpha Flight and X-Force, hence his appearance in this series and the reason why I'm still gonna talk about him on this list, so haha! Number 3, Nathan. Nathan of the X-Men is definitely a ripoff of Cyclops, but something that I think is actually really interesting is he isn't a direct one-for-one copy. His powers are actually, in a way, kind of like the opposite of Scott's, or at least an alternative, if not, you know, the direct opposite to Scott's powers. They're not really the direct opposite, but they work in a very different way, but something that kind of feels like the opposite. Let me explain. While Nathan can also be spotted wearing shades with even a similar hairstyle, I'd say to Scott's, his powers allow him to see everything extremely well. Instead of expelling optic blasts from his eyes are more like great receptors for light, meaning that he can see things most people can't. Nathan, like Scott though, is also known for being the team leader of the X-Men, so yeah, they definitely are meant to be kind of like parallels of each other, but I do like that Byrne decided to give us a very different kind of like eye related mutation here. Also, this power set kind of makes me think of Eye-Boy, who I don't think was created yet when X-Men first appeared. I'm pretty sure they appeared in like the 90s or the 80s. You know, Eye-Boy didn't come out until the 2000s, so it is possible that Nathan, who was definitely inspired by Psyche, may have also influenced the creation of other X-Men like Eye-Boy, who appeared over at Marvel after Nathan's first appearance in X-Men over at Dark Horse, which is pretty neat actually. Number 2, Onslaught. I mean, if we want to get a little loose with the definition of a team. I would say a team is just more than one person, so I don't even think this is that loose. But then we could consider Onslaught to be an evil X-Men team. Technically, he was originally made up of a team of 2 people, Professor X and Magneto, both of whom have been known to lead the X-Men in the history of the comics. And while this psychic entity originally was only a combination of their 2 minds, when Onslaught returns appearing on Krakoa, it's actually because Onslaught is linked to basically everyone who has died and then been resurrected on the island. Basically, Onslaught managed to live on in Charles' psyche and then use his small, like, kind of sliver of existence there to make his way into each upload following a mutant's resurrection, thereby getting out little pieces of Onslaught all over until they could come together and make one giant Onslaught. So in essence, Onslaught is also a part of everyone who has died and been brought back to life on the mutant island nation. This version of Onslaught as such poses an even greater threat to mutant kind and the world, especially as it creates and feeds off chaotic energy, infecting the mutants that it is a part of, but also feasting off of that chaotic energy as well. So, ugh. Number 1, Future X-Men. The Future X-Men weren't actually X-Men. That was the problem when it came to their evilness. That was all part of their evil plot. Although this mutant group advertised themselves as X-Men once they traveled back in time, in reality, we had later learned that they were indeed not X-Men at all, but instead were an evil future brotherhood. The team was initially formed by Charles Xavier II, the son of Charles and Mystique. He ended up recruiting the team to stand opposed to the X-Men, who Charles saw as a disappointment in regards to what his father had hoped for them. Charles II, that is, not the original Charles. While Charles II's team failed at defeating the X-Men multiple times, Reyes, Charles' half-brother, with Reyes' parents being Wolverine and Mystique, got the idea to travel back in time to when the X-Men would be more vulnerable in order to defeat them.
Number 10. Armor. Armor, aka Hisako Ichiki, is actually a pretty powerful X-Men, even in the 616 universe, who can create a psionic exoskeleton suit of armor. This exoskeleton is incredibly strong, durable, impenetrable, and it's fueled by energy from Hisako's ancestors in the 616 universe. But not in the Ultimate Universe, no sir. In this universe, Armor's exoskeleton takes the shape of giant animals and even dragons sometimes. Oh, and also in 1610, her exoskeleton is fueled by 10,000 mythological Japanese spirit demons. Like, how freaking awesome is that? Armor is cool and powerful enough that when the Ultimate Universe was destroyed, she was able to slip her way into the 616 Prime Universe, until she was kidnapped by Miss Sinister and eventually lost her life in X-Men Blue number 28 in 2018. Number 9. Firestar. Honestly, Firestar is one of those flame-wielding mutants that kind of flies over my head a lot of the time. Usually I think of Pyro, but in the Ultimate Universe, Pyro is actually not resistant to his own flames and therefore is covered in scar tissue and has like no nerve endings. But Firestar in both 616 and the Ultimate Universe is way cooler. Or I guess technically hotter, because fire. Ironically, her character actually had a huge phobia and hate of mutants, until her powers of microwave energy manipulation manifested, which seems to actually take the form of pyrokinesis in this universe. Her whole body can engulf in flames that she is thankfully resistant to. It allows her to fly and surprisingly burn things and people. Like when the super creepy Ultimate Wolverine tried to hit on her and she threatened to burn his nipples off. Number 8. It's Wolverine. I am gonna be honest, this version of Wolverine is a bit alarming in terms of his morals and preferences, and just his behavior in general is just a bit less heroic than his 616 counterpart. But despite that, it is hard not to admit that he is quite the powerful character. His healing factor is a bit different than his prime version and is called a survival factor. That means he can survive being torn in half, departed from his head, and even blown up by a nuclear bomb. He can also detect lies and still has an adamantium skeleton. He was trained by Weapon X as an emotionless assassin, but when the Brotherhood hired him to take out Xavier, he proves he is more than just muscle, overcoming his brainwashing and joining the X-Men, although it may have also been because he fell in love with the teenage Jean Grey when he was like 30.
Number 7. Charles Xavier II. Charles Xavier II is the son of Charles Xavier and Mystique, if you can believe that. I know, it's pretty shocking. Charles Xavier II was technically born into the reality of Earth 616, where we later find out that while Mystique actually took the form of Moira when giving birth, Charles actually knew that he was in a relationship with Raven, so it wasn't like a trick of hers, they were actually just wanted to be together, I guess. This version of Charles, however, is an all grown up one from the alternate future of Earth 13729. When his powers first manifested, he accidentally killed his adoptive mother and ended up later joining forces with his half-brother Raze, another child of Mystique's sired by Wolverine, another child of the X-Men. Charles Xavier II has a brilliant and conniving mind, and like his father, is an immensely gifted telepath, capable of using his powers to bend others to his will.
Number 6. Rogue. Similar to her Prime Universe version, Rogue, or Marion Carlisle, drains the life force and absorbs the memories and abilities of others through skin-to-skin contact, with the caveat being that she can end someone's life if she holds on too long. Now, in the Ultimate Universe, it turns out doing this on a mutant to the point of hitting the end of the line will actually permanently transfer those powers over to Rogue. This happened twice. The first time was with Gambit. She drained his life force when he was already near the end after a fight with the mutant Juggernaut, and she gained his kinetic energy manipulation abilities, plus sometimes his accent. The second time she did this, she drained the powers of Juggernaut himself when he was near death, gaining his abilities permanently, giving her the strength to throw cars, the durability to withstand demolishing buildings, super speed, and limitless stamina. She would use those abilities to help the X-Men.
Coming in at number 5, we have the group known as Sinister's 6, and surprisingly, this isn't just a bunch of Spider-Man villains. A group of 6 red-eyed clones of the X-Men working for Mr. Sinister, this villainous group did have a few run-ins with the Wallcrawler, but only during the series known as Spider-Man and the X-Men, so it all works out. These evil clones were initially an intense obstacle preventing the real X-Men from getting closer to Mr. Sinister's schemes, but would ironically eventually be defeated by the same condition that seems to always follow Spider-Man related clone stories: cellular degeneration. Better luck next time, Sinister 6.
Alright, number 4, Storm. The Omega level mutant known as Storm has a little bit of a different backstory compared to her main universe counterpart. On 1610, Aurora Monroe was an immigrant from Morocco who was found by Professor X living in Athens, Texas, where she'd been stealing cars for a living. When she took a 1978 Mustang for a joyride, the police finally caught up with her, and Aurora used her powers to create a lightning storm to escape. Unlike her main universe counterpart though, she didn't have the training yet to control her powers to such a high degree, and put some children in danger when she summoned the lightning storm, which eventually allowed the police to catch her. Xavier sent Jean Grey to convince the Athens authorities that Aurora was actually an FBI agent and that she was sent to relieve them of the mutant, and she went on to join the X-Men. She is much more sarcastic and rebellious, and also had relationships with both Beast and Wolverine. She didn't just create storms, she created drama.
Number 3. Hope Summers. Hope is the adopted daughter of Cable, who was originally known as the Mutant Messiah Baby. Cable saved Hope from Bishop, who basically wanted to destroy her. In Bishop's reality, the Mutant Messiah would end up causing the event that led to the oppression and persecution of mutants. However, in Cable's reality, the Mutant Messiah would grow up to become a savior, so you can see why these two were opposed on this topic. For the X-Men of Earth 616, the Mutant Messiah was the first new mutant to have been born since basically M-Day, and so she brought hope to the mutants of the 616 reality. Cable body slided with Hope to another time to raise her in safety. He would end up naming Hope after her adoptive mother, his love who died, Hope, and she got the Summers name from Cable himself. But although she looks a lot like Jean, she actually has no biological relation to the Summers or the Grey families, at least not that we know of. Hope's mutant abilities allow her to copy the powers of anyone within a certain range. Hope also gains access to these powers without struggling at all to use them, receiving them basically at their peak level and with the auto knowledge basically of how to use them. So if you're like, oh, she's gotta like figure it out, no, she's just like instant god mode with those powers basically.
Number 2. Professor X. In the Ultimate Universe, much like in the main one, Charles Xavier was the most powerful telepath on Earth, possessing vast psionic abilities and was known as one of the most powerful mutants ever. His mutant abilities give him telepathy, astral projection, and this version experiences some telekinetic skills as well, unlike his 616 version. He is also a genius with skills in surgery, therapy, and biochemistry. The only thing that I would say is both kind of a power boost and a bit of a caveat is the fact that while he's a good guy, he is also somewhat corrupt, or like very corrupt, as well as very manipulative. He willingly reads and messes with the minds of others, like Bobby Drake, who had a girlfriend when he first joined the X-Men who almost convinced him to leave the team, so Xavier erased her from Bobby's memory. It's kinda really messed up. He even created the mutant drug Banshee. Like, sure, he knows what he's doing is wrong, but that doesn't really make it okay, you know what I mean? And number 1, it's Jean Grey. Did you think it was going to be anyone else? As an extremely powerful telepath and telekinetic, she is already a pretty tough character to take on. But as almost all of us know, Jean Grey is the host for the Phoenix Force, and that still remains the case here on Earth 1610. Only, she seems to use even more of that power. Unleashing a small fraction of her power melted the armor of Apocalypse, but her full might against him tore him apart atom by atom, causing him so much pain Apocalypse begged her to stop. Apocalypse begged her to stop. As the Phoenix, she reversed time, read people's minds, saved the whole team multiple times, and took off into space, literally traveling to what was essentially heaven. There is a reason people fear Jean Grey, and the Phoenix Force gives them all the more reason to poop their pants.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Wild West themed Xavier Gang. In an alternate Marvel universe that bears an incredible resemblance to America in the 1800s, a band of outlaws known as the Xavier Gang are plaguing a small town in Arizona, with every mutant member of the team being individually mind-controlled by a distant and diabolical version of Professor Charles Xavier. Using this team of the X-Men as puppets made up of both superheroes and supervillains, this Western crook version of Xavier was only defeated once a multiverse-spanning team of X-Men showed up to put an end to his mind-controlling ways. Coming in at number 9, we have the bloodthirsty Vampire Wolverine. In an alternate universe where vampires have launched an all-out assault on the United States, most of the X-Men are bitten and mind-controlled by the Lord of the Vampires, Dracula. Unfortunately for Dracula, however, Wolverine's healing ability allows him to regain his own mental control despite becoming a vampire, and thus is able to overthrow Dracula and become leader of the vampires. Consumed by a bloodlust that amplifies his already pretty frightening rage, Wolverine and his vampire army are able to wipe out most other superpowered life on the planet, only finally being defeated by the combined forces of Doctor Strange and the Punisher as a vampire hunting combination. Coming in at number 8, we have perhaps the most infamous X-Men palette swap with Dark Beast. Originally hailing from the alternate timeline known as the Age of Apocalypse, this version of Hank McCoy was a twisted mad scientist working under the tutelage of Mr. Sinister, striving to create the most powerful mutants possible no matter the cost. Although this messed up future would be prevented by the X-Men, Dark Beast was wily enough to find a way into the main Marvel universe and avoid his existence being erased. Ever since, he's been a persistent thorn in the X-Men's side, and a particular burden on Beast, who would much rather that someone didn't use his genius for evil.
Number 7. Psylocke. Colonel Betsy Braddock of Strike is England's most powerful telepath, capable of reading minds, creating psychic grenades that explode in the minds of others, and one of her coolest powers, brandishing a purple psychic energy blade. She was once possessed by the mutant David Xavier, but she was strong enough to overpower him momentarily, which, if you know anything about him and his level of power, is not something to scoff at. When Colossus dropped a car on her, her consciousness was powerful enough to jump into the body of a coma patient named Quanon, kind of calling back to how Betsy and Quanon share a connection in the main 616 universe.
Coming in at number 6, we have the Brainwashed Wolverine of Earth 14850. At one point in the regular Marvel universe, Wolverine was captured and brainwashed by Hydra in order to assassinate the Avengers, but luckily was able to be deprogrammed before he did any real lasting damage. On this alternate Earth, however, the deprogramming never took place, and Wolverine's killing spree of superpowered heroes was able to last for months. Armed with all of his incredible abilities, absolutely no remorse, and the addition of Hydra-developed teleporting technology that nullified even Wolverine's usual weaknesses, and this was a horrifying enemy that even the Avengers couldn't handle.
Number 5. Cable. Cable is the son of Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, non-X member Madeline Pryor, who later becomes the villain known as the Goblin Queen, and another X-Man's, Jean Grey, who kind of becomes like an adoptive mother but who also possesses Madeline's memories of raising baby Christopher. Because comics. Cable is Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, often referred to as just Nathan Summers or really just Cable, although back in the day we did know him as Baby Christopher. Cable as a baby was kidnapped by Apocalypse and infected with the techno-organic virus. This is the only thing that makes him weak-ish, but really he is still amazingly strong as he can even fend off that virus, containing it to one side of his body using his psionic powers. That in and of itself is pretty impressive, as the techno-organic virus is generally known for being, well, unstoppable. Even with his psionic powers mainly preoccupied, Cable is still a hard one to beat, as he has so many combatant-based skills that he brings to the table, and he is also an experienced time traveler besides.
Coming in at number 4, we have the twisted Bobby Drake, aka Iceman of the Age of Apocalypse universe. In a world where Apocalypse has taken over mutant kind and only Magneto and a few X-Men are capable of fighting back, the usually optimistic Bobby Drake was forged into a heartless warrior, giving him much stronger control of his ice powers than other depictions of the character, and becoming a living streak of ice that can travel instantly through water to lethal effect. This version of Iceman would eventually betray his teammates and ally himself with Dark Beast, and was only eventually able to be defeated by having his head shoved inside a furnace, a surefire way to finally melt this evil Iceman.
Number 3. Iceman. In the 616 reality, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, was one of the original X-Men and has achieved the classification of Omega level with his powers of cryokinesis and hydrokinesis. Now, in the Earth 1610 reality, he is actually one of the youngest members of the group, and it's almost as if he was kind of given a power boost. I know that doesn't make sense. How can you like boost an Omega level character? You can't. But he wields his powers in more interesting ways. He has always been able to transform his body, but he also creates gigantic ice trolls and ice walls. He's proven his worth by stopping a Weapon X invasion and the Ultimates all on his own. Professor Xavier himself has claimed that Iceman is one of the 3 most powerful X-Men, and he's probably not wrong. But I do gotta say, I don't know what they were thinking giving him the do-rag. I don't get it.
Coming in at number 2, we have the one and only Magneto from the Ultimate Universe. Magneto might often be an enemy of the X-Men, but in recent years has allied himself with them more often than not. This version of Magneto, however, is much more cynical and dark than the more complex figure of the regular Marvel Universe. And when he believed his children had been killed by Dr. Doom, Ultimate Magneto was furious enough to begin a global genocide. Switching the polarity of Earth's poles with his magnetic powers and beginning the incredibly controversial event known as Ultimatum, this version of Magneto caused the deaths of millions of people and dozens of beloved superheroes, and was only finally stopped when Cyclops put him out of his misery with a laser blast directly to the head. And finally, coming to our top spot, we have another version of Professor Charles Xavier, or more specifically, the part of his mind known as Onslaught. For years, Professor X has done all he can to achieve peace and prosperity for mutant kind, while not allowing his anger at humanity to get the better of him. But after all this time of psychically repressing every dark and evil thought he ever had, Xavier had made the perfect ticking time bomb. And when he briefly had a mental battle with his best frenemy, Magneto, a portion of Magneto's less held back personality combined with all of the darkness in Xavier's heart and created one of the most dangerous psychic creations of all time, the villain known as Onslaught. A personality made up of the worst possible versions of both Professor X and Magneto, Onslaught is the pinnacle of what can happen when the X-Men go bad.
Number 10, Crusader. Crusader is the daughter of X-Men team member Rogue and Avenger Captain America. I know, a weird combination. But in the reality of Earth 9811, these two ended up together after the heroes and villains on Battleworld decided to call a truce. Remaining there, they settled down and raised families, putting their differences aside. I'm not sure how their relationship worked, with Rogue not really being able to touch people and all at this point, or how she had a child considering that, but perhaps, like on Earth 616, she eventually was able to work through the trauma causing this side effect of her powers. Or perhaps the Captain America of Earth 9811 was immune to her involuntary energy and power draining effects. Either way, Sarah is their daughter. She gets much of her power from her mother, or rather she gets much of her power from the power her mother had absorbed in her day, meaning that Sarah is super strong, durable, and can fly. She is also considered worthy enough to lift Thor's hammer and wields her father's shield. Number 9, Wolverine. I really wanted to put Laura Kinney higher up on this list because, well, I love her so much, but unfortunately the psionics are just always pushing some of my favorite and most powerful characters further down on these lists. Those psionics. Oh well. Laura Kinney as X-23 and now Wolverine is still one of the most powerful children of the X-Men around. Some argue that she is more clone, while others argue that she is more biological offspring of Logan, but in reality, she's kind of a bit of both. She was created as a female clone of Wolverine after his genetic material was combined with that of her creator, scientist Sarah Kinney. Sarah noticed that there were damaged spots basically in the samples of Logan's genetic material that they had, which was why their cloning process had been unsuccessful up to this point. And so she used her own genetic material to patch those rough spots, which made Laura a female clone. Sarah was forced to carry Laura to term as a surrogate by her jealous colleague Xander Rice, as punishment for even creating the female clone to begin with, a strategy that admittedly had not been approved. Laura has powers similar to her father. She has a regenerative healing factor and was also trained from birth to be a skilled fighter, bodyguard, and assassin. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about more children of the X-Men, there are a lot out there in the multiverse. Be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Chimera. Chimera is the daughter of Storm and likely Black Panther, who hails from the alternate reality of 13729. Yeah, sadly Storm and T'Challa have never had a child together in the main continuity. I know, it's a bit of a bummer. Unless they had like a real secret child that we just don't know about yet, but I doubt it. Chimera seems to have inherited the powers of her mother, but also shares a connection to the Earth, which allows her to draw on and harness its energy. She is also a skilled tracker and can communicate telepathically with animals. I'd also assume, as she's the daughter of Storm, that she's a skilled combatant as well. As while Storm is more well known for her goddess status and weather manipulation powers, she is also an extremely skilled fighter. And if she's Black Panther's daughter, then she should definitely be a skilled fighter. I mean, you got two amazing parents that are both amazing fighters, so just saying.
Coming in at number 7, we have the possessed Shadow Professor X from Earth 6141. Isn't that a mouthful? During the event known as M-Day, when Scarlet Witch wiped out most of mutant kind, the extremely powerful telepath known as the Shadow King was able to escape the loss of his powers by transferring his mind throughout the multiverse to the alternate world of Earth 6141, where he was able to successfully possess the mind of this world's Charles Xavier before the X-Men were even human form. Combining both of their telepathic might, this version of Xavier turned all of his students into perfect killing machines and placed them firmly under his psychic control, getting them to kill any superheroes who tried to interfere in the Shadow King's schemes.
Number 6. Polaris. Polaris is the daughter of Magneto, and while you might not think of Magneto as being an X-Men, considering, he started out as an X-Men villain, he has also worked with the team before and even served as a member himself. Heck, at one point he was in charge of the whole New Mutants crew, let's not forget that. Magneto may have some questionable methods when it comes to getting justice that put him on the spectrum of villain, but I think at the end of the day, he's just trying to do what's best for mutants. Or at least what he thinks is best for mutant kind. Polaris, like her father, also has magnetic-based powers, which, like her father, are also pretty impressive. Polaris is considered an alpha level mutant and recently got to join the X-Men team herself after being elected to join them in the Krakoan X-Men elections. Psychic elections. Imagine if we could all just vote psychically. That would be awesome. That would be so much easier. You would just sit down and you'd be like, who do I want to vote for? Done.
Number 5. Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde, as we know her, is known for her ability to phase herself and others through solid matter. She also has the ability on Earth 1610, but in this universe she discovered she can also minimize the negative space around her atoms, becoming super dense and granting herself extra dimensional mass, giving her enough strength to smash through concrete and metal and punch Spider-Man through the air, making her as hard as diamond and able to withstand attacks from the Phoenix, and making herself weigh 90 tons at peak mass. But that's as well as her phasing ability, which can allow her to walk on air and water. And that's before her exposure to Giant Man's serum to fight Galactus that leveled her up even more, allowing her to increase in size and gain a healing factor. Definitely one of my favorite Ultimate X-Men, and not just because of her romance with Peter Parker.
Number 4. Rachel Summers. Yes, get ready, because many of the most powerful X-Kids out there just happen to be Summers related, so yeah, get ready for that. Honestly, I've always wanted to do a video just to explain the complicated nature that is the Summers and Gray family tree, which honestly is a lot, and it's very timey-wimey. Rachel herself is one of those very complex kids of theirs. She is the daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers from the alternate Earth of 811. In that reality, she was made into a hound, a weapon used to hunt down mutants, even being one herself. Rachel is an extremely powerful telepath and telekinetic who also has the ability to chronoskim and manipulate time, even traveling through it. Rachel is also known for being an avatar of the Phoenix, at one time actually considered the true avatar for it, but then later having the power sort of dialed down to a mere echo of it. So she was no longer the true avatar, they were just like, you just have a thing, and it's not even like the real Phoenix Force, but it's like a version of it. Still, the seeming piece or echo of the Phoenix Force that resides within her has been known to flare up from time to time, or her connection to the Phoenix Force, however we want to see that, occasionally boosting Rachel to an off-the-charts level of power. But like I said, that doesn't happen all the time.
Coming in at number 3, we have the vampire variant of Storm, known fittingly enough as Bloodstorm. In an alternate reality where Storm was bitten by Dracula before discovering the X-Men, Storm came to Charles Xavier for help with her condition. Unfortunately, her bloodlust was too strong and she wound up feasting on both the Professor and Beast. Horrified at what she'd done, this version of Storm would eventually try and redeem herself after she found herself as part of an invasion force attacking the main Marvel universe. While she eventually bonded and made amends with the Beast of this dimension, her combination of weather controlling and vampire powers made Bloodstorm one of the more powerful X-Men variants that the regular X-Men ever had to face.
Number 2. Scarlet Witch. Wanda is known for being one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe. She has used her powers to completely warp reality the world over, and her chaos magic has pulled off other immensely world-changing feats, such as flipping the alignment of all major heroes and villains in the comics during the events of Axis. Initially, her chaos magic powers were believed to be somewhat mutant in origin. In fact, they were kind of presented initially as like Jinx-like mystical mutant abilities during her first appearances. However, we've since learned that both Wanda and her superpowered brother Pietro, aka Quicksilver, were never really mutants at all, nor were they related to Magneto. However, they still spent a good amount of their life around Magneto, who secretly believed them to be his children, and then another good amount of time thinking that he was their actual father, until it was revealed that this was all due to manipulation by the High Evolutionary. High Evolutionary just coming in and messing pretty much everybody up when it comes to their backstories and origins. Wanda herself has never really gotten along with the X-Men, especially since the events of M-Day, but she is still considered, I think, a part of Magneto's family, and a powerful one at that, regardless of her status as a mutant or a non-mutant. I know there are some people out there that want to be like, it never happened, but like, they still spent a lot of time together thinking that they were family, so I think we can still count it, friends. Also, make Wanda a mutant again. Do it. Make it happen. Give me Wanda and Quicksilver back. Number 1. X-Man. X-Man is Nathaniel Grey, the lab-born child made by combining the genetic materials of both Jean Grey and Cyclops. So basically like Cable, but if he had been made perfectly by villain Mr. Sinister. He actually hails from the alternate reality of AOA, Age of Apocalypse, Earth 295. Here, Sinister created him to use as his own weapon, but of course, Nate being so powerful, managed to escape Sinister and instead ended up being raised by Forge of Earth 295. He is considered one of the most powerful mutants of all time, which would also make him one of the most powerful children of the X-Men out there. Nate can warp reality, resurrect the dead, resurrect himself, travel to alternate Earths and dimensions, and even manipulate the time stream. He's basically the most OP of characters when it comes to the Marvel Universe. And if you've seen artwork of him, you will probably recognize him as someone who looks like Mutant Jesus, which yes, he is god level, so that is the point.